panel is going to be talking more about carnivorous fishes and some of the progress that they've made with alternative ingredients. And so we're going to hear a little bit more from the companies and the farms that are growing a lot of carnivorous fishes, and also how they've coped with the Peruvian anchoveta situation in the last year. And so we've got Boyd Wei as Director of Foreign Trade Manager at Japan-based Dainichi Corporation, and Vidar, Global Sustainability Director at BioMar, and Anders Bylling, who's the Group CEO and Vice President of Aqua, which is a Denmark-based company, but producing feed for many years globally. And so, Boyd, did you have a couple slides? No?
I'm going to pass that on.
You're going to pass? Okay.
And let that be free information for you guys to use as you...
All right. And Vidar, do you?
Yeah.
A couple slides?
I do have.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a few slides here. There you are. Okay. Who we are, what we do. Those first slides are not that important. It's we are all over the world, producing almost 1.5 million tons of feed with a turnover about 2.4 billion euros. Right now we have almost 2,000 employees, and we have sales to more than 90 countries. So we have 17 sites around the world. Yeah, and we provide feed to about 50 different species, where you can see that Atlantic salmon is by far the biggest one, and then we have shrimp there as number 2 at 14%. But the slide that I really wanted to talk a little bit more about is this one here, because I think it will give some context to what we will discuss here. These are some of the supply chain challenges that we are facing every day. So we are navigating these troubled waters, and there are things happening around the world all the time, and at different scale and intensity, as you will see here by the size of these suns. There you see more. I don't know if we can read this, but we have everything that we need to consider. Many of them are sustainability challenges, but also it could be just regular supply chain challenges. We have the war in Ukraine. We need to adapt to that one. We do have issues when it comes to pressure on soy, that many claim that all soy comes from the Amazon in Brazil. It doesn't. On the fishery side, we have ecosystem issues, as you can see down there in Antarctica. When it comes to krill, fishery management is a thing that goes on. Poaching, modern slavery. We have issues around the supply of phosphorus, for example, up in North Africa that not many knows about, but we are running out of phosphorus. And that's a disputed land problem. All the things that we saw during COVID, of course, when it comes to the supply of global commodities. So I hope this can give some context to what we will discuss now.
Thank you, Vidar. That's great. Appreciate it. Anders, can you tell us a little bit about Aller?
Yes, I would love to do that. So my name is Anders Bylling. I'm the 4th generation owner of our family business. We're producing aqua feed for the last 60 years this year. We actually started as a toll manufacturer for the company that now is Cargill. And after 10 years, my grandfather, he was offered to. They would buy us out. My grandfather said no, and that's why we're still here as an aqua feed player globally. We produce in Europe and in Africa and in China, and with great ambitions to expand as well. And I think it's nice to come after Vidar, because they are a bigger brother from Denmark as well. but also because he makes some really good points. The challenges that we face as an aquaculture company is really that we're trying to bring all the knowledge that you have here in this room and elsewhere to the farmers. And you need to remember that to a large extent this is about supply chains, like Vidar said. It's about how we ingrain the knowledge that we've learned from you and from others into solutions that actually makes a difference for the farmer locally. And that's more difficult than you'd think, especially because you need to consider that farming is very different whether you talk Africa, you talk new species in Europe, or you talk about farming at a far away from major sources of raw materials, as in Zambia, for instance, for us. So at Aqua, we believe that we can provide farmers a sustainable option for the future. We want to be a leading responsible feed producer in the world, and we think that we are. And I think a bit of background to both where Vidar is coming from in BioMar, a Danish company as well, and us, is that the Danish industry really developed as we were under pressure from the government and the NGOs to restrict our emissions of phosphorus and nitrogen. So the restrictions put in place forced us to be more efficient with our use of raw materials, to ensure that the emissions after the farm were less, and also that at the end of the day, the fish would be a healthy fish that would be delivering a water back to the water environment that it's living in, that were in a proper state. And that pressure that came in the 80s, especially in 90s in the Danish industry, is really what gave the Danish industry such a big heads up. That's also why you see a lot of the rust producers coming, technology providers from Denmark as well, because the whole industry was under pressure. So that's basically what we're selling today. And I think that's also one of the big strengths from BioMar, is that they were on the same journey as us, on a bigger scale, but still with this pressure from the outside as to how can we improve, how can we make things better than we did before. And that's, I think, also why we're here today. That's why it's so exciting to be here again. I think it's a really interesting challenge that we're facing, and we'll talk more about it now, I'm sure. But at Aqua, we see that we have a key role to play in this. And we can see that it's very much also about making these solutions available to farmers in the way that they can understand without impacting their cost. Because we are working in a value chain where somebody has to pay for it, or we have to improve it in a way that it's cost-free for them. And for the most of the farmers that I meet, whether that is in Asia, or that is in Europe or Africa, they'll tell me, look, I'm happy, I'll do it, but who's carrying the cost? Are you? Am I? No. So I think it's important to remember that this is a value chain challenge that we have. It's fine to say that we are ambitious and we want to be perfect. We all agree with that. But as a feed company, we need to look them in the eye and show them that this can actually be done every day. Shipments every week to wherever they are in the world. And that's really challenging. So I think that's why it's so interesting to see what we can do across the value chain, how we can do cooperations deep. You've shown some nice cases with both the Locduart in Scotland and also with the Kvarøy and Whole Foods in the US, which I think are very good proof points that you can actually reach deep in the value chain and bring this together. We see that that is one of the options that we will be working on as well. So yeah, I think I could probably keep talking, but I'll leave you to it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Anders. Boyd is with Dainichi, and should note that Boyd and his team have been involved with F3 virtually from the beginning, been to all 3 conferences, I think, and were recognized with a prize in our last contest for some of their work with diets for red sea bream. So let me turn it over and let you introduce a little bit more.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Boyd with Dainichi. Yeah, so we really sort of got into being a sustainable, or trying to be more sustainable, back when the El Nino in 2010 happened. Before then, we were importing really high-grade sand eel oil and meal from FF Denmark, super high-end fishmeal and fish oil. And all of a sudden, that El Nino just sort of blew us out, and we could not compete price-wise. We couldn't compete with the big dogs. And we switched to salmon oil I think we were one of the first companies to start using salmon oil in aquaculture. Started using shrimp meal. And so that was our journey on trying to find raw materials that we could use and get economic benefit out of our speed. So, and then with the last challenge with red sea bream, and we actually got some good results compared with the marine control diet. It was about 10% less, but the results that we got were interesting enough that we decided that we needed to invest in that black soldier fly, right, insect meal company, and so take a strategic sort of position there to make sure that we can have sustainable raw materials.
So that brings up an interesting question with BioMar and Aller. Have you looked at these kinds of things of investing in some of these ingredient companies?
Yeah, Vidar commented a bit on it yesterday. I think actually we in 2008 and 9 we did a joint venture with pea protein in Germany, which is a pretty good fish meal replacement. But the problem was that you just need a few amino acids and then you're there. It's a bit more than that, but it's doable, definitely. The problem was that quite soon after we opened that factory, the prices in pet food were quite higher. So we sell all the pea protein to pet food. We don't use any of it ourselves. So yeah, I mean, yes, we do see investments in downstream as interesting, but we don't have that financial muscle to do that. We have enough factories to build. So there's a bit of a sort of a balance there to strike. What I think, and that's also what we've been discussing in these days a bit, is of course that we're very willing to go into sort of like a long-term strategic partnership. You mentioned that as well, Vidar, and I think that's another way to sort of approach this in a way that still binds and can help new companies come off the ground, but not as capital intensive for us to do.
Okay, good. Vidar?
Yeah. Up till now, at least, we have not invested in any companies. We have been seeking out partnerships, looking into that, strategic partnerships. We feel like that is actually what will foster innovation the most. Often those cases where we see where a company buy another company to supply them with things they expect to get the best because they have bought them, and they receive the exact opposite for the very same reason. Because then they just rely on each other differently. So strategic partnerships has been the way we have done things for now. We have also had some success in that before, but it's like Anders says, it's not easy at all. And I think it takes commitments through the supply chain and value chain. Actually through the value chain. It's better to use the value chain here than the commitments. There are many steps here where we can add value to things and hopefully put some of the extra costs on the end consumer at the end, or share the cost differently. So, but we are looking into things. There are many things to hope for. We need this. We need to stop being to have to depend on marine ingredients. We can't do that. So we must succeed here, and that is also, I would say, the aim for you when you have these challenges. But it mustn't be like a goal in itself to not use marine ingredients. And I hope it's not either for you. You just need to prove it's possible. Because some marine ingredients, I forgot to mention that yesterday. For example, for the fish oil we used in 2023, half of that came from trimmings. So that's from the byproducts for fish going to human consumption. So that's just smart use of the resources. So we need to begin there, use the resources smarter, optimize the systems, and of course the sources need to be responsible and sustainable, and not to add any pressure on the fisheries around.
Yeah, I just want to second that a bit, and I think Craig said that as well a bit earlier. we don't have an explicit ambition to remove marine ingredients. That's not the ambition. The ambition for us is to provide the best aquaculture solution for the farmers, full stop. And that means that we will, of course, use the available resources that are there. But as Vidar is saying, we need options. And that's what we've been trying to do. That's what since we were here last time in 2019, we have become much more familiar with insect meal as a raw material. We are much more familiar with gas protein, mycoprotein, with the algae oils, etc. A lot of stuff has happened in 5 years. So it's not like nothing is happening. And we are replacing. And it was also mentioned earlier from Kristen that there is, for some species, still some over nutrition, too high levels of nutrition in some feeds. And that's especially the case when you think about how many species are actually totally underdeveloped from the nutritional point of view. We feed a lot of species, especially marine species, that are relatively new to aquaculture. Cod, halibut, grouper. And these species, honestly speaking, I'm sure there's a lot of people who know a lot, but there's still a lot we don't know yet. Let's just recognize that at least. And we definitely see the potential to decrease the marine ingredients in these feeds. But we need options that really work. And that's what we've been testing and we continue to work on testing. So we do believe that as a long term, I think fish meal will be there to some extent and fish oil to some extent as well. But it's not like we have any love for it. It's just the best option out there. When pet food is willing to pay for our own pea protein more than we're willing to pay for it, it's cheaper for us to use fish meal than our own produced pea protein. Think about that. I can talk to a farmer in Nigeria tomorrow and he'll tell me, that's very fine, you want to achieve your ESG targets? Great. I need feed, I have catfish, I'm feeding it tomorrow. I want the best solution you can offer me for my farm in a way that makes my farm efficient, long-term sustainable, both from an economic but also from an environmental point of view. Because most farmers are living in that environment and they do want that to be healthy. But it's a balance there, and I think that's very important to remember.
Yeah. There is one thing that at least from the Japanese perspective. Unfortunately, back when we had mad cow disease, we ended up with a bunch of EP that was infected and had to use that. And because of that, the Japanese government closed down and you're not allowed to import poultry meal, feather meal, meatball meal, blood meal, anything. So, and for the longest time, you couldn't use anything but marine ingredients or vegetable ingredients. And so that really sort of tied our hands. And so now we're able to use domestic rendering byproduct. And so getting these new ingredients, the insect meal, the single cell proteins and things like that, getting them registered with the government, I think that's also really, really important. Making the people that are rubber stamping and in the government office, making them understand how these products work. I think that also is really key.
Yeah. So do you anticipate this being another issue with the EU, getting some of these alternative ingredients? I know they insect meals have come quite a ways, but some of the other ones, single cell proteins, algae meals, where are we with EU use of those or approval of those?
Well, I don't. Well, in the EU, there's some extra level of regulations, typically, always. So for the insects, yes, there we see an issue. So we have there are two schools when it comes to insect meal productions. You have the EU rules, and then you have the rest of the world, where the rest of the world will be the most sustainable way of producing insects because they can use whatever feedstock there is and whatever substrate there is. Whereas in the EU, they're very food safety oriented. So it needs to be of food and feed grade quality, the feedstock, which will limit, of course, some of the substrates that can be used. Potentially also add some costs. But still, there are many companies within the EU that focus on insect meal production. So I think there will be quite some volume coming in here. And I mentioned it yesterday that we will see the second and third generation insect meal coming in. That's just made up terms by me, but it's the first generation that came in that, and this is important because it just points to a thing where you are a startup coming with some potential new novel ingredients, and you just do it yourself, and you think that this will be a fantastic product without checking in with a feed supplier. And that's what was happened with that first generation. The quality was not good. It was the sustainability performance was terrible, and it was not consistent in nutritional value either. But then we had a talk, worked with them, and what's coming out now with which I would call the second generation is much better, and the third generation is when they will really reach what they say they will reach and aim for, the lowest possible FCR, where we can really see and gain the benefits from that as well, and that is soon to come.
Yeah, I second that. I think there's another aspect as well to remember, is that one thing is the legislative problems and just the maturation of the product, as you say, which I think is a really important point. But the next thing is that then we've got this nice basket of raw materials. And Christian was also saying that I don't know what happens at GrowBest in the dark rooms, but at least there's no dark rooms in Aqua. I would say that from the beginning. But there's a truth to that there's very little trust between farmers and feed companies. And that's just something that, I mean, we know that, we accept that, we try to sort of work with that, but that's a fact. It's a fact because the farmer cannot validate what they're getting. They can't, they have to, at some level, they can wait and see later in the cycle that it performed as it should, but it might not. And it might not for a lot of environmental reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the feed. And the feed company will say, it's not my fault, all these things. But the point is, when we look at these new raw materials and we want to introduce some of this to new farmers, I still have farmers who say, Anas, can I get a bit more krill? And I say, why? Why do you need more krill? Well, it's good, right? And this is the... Introducing new raw materials is not that easy. There's an acceptance level on the farmer level, later on the processor, later in retail, of course, and that takes time. And I think that's also something we need to stick with it and see this as a long run. And that's why what is happening now with insect meal, but also with the others, and Heikki was talking about the mycoprotein and how they're developing that to the next generation as well, mycoprotein. That development has to happen because these products need to mature. But then after that, we need to go and sell it to a farmer. And that farmer needs to convince their retailer that, it's true that this canola oil with extra DHA is actually GM modified, but that's what we want, right? And this whole chain takes a long time. And one of the problems in that is because of the lack of trust between farmers and feed manufacturers. I don't think we can change that. We try. I think you do as well. I don't know Dainichi as well, but it's something what we work on. But there's a reason why this mistrust is there. And that's something I just need everybody to remember, that it's not because we don't want to introduce these new solutions tomorrow, but it takes time for that to mature with the farmer. I hope that makes sense.
Well, and is this somewhat of a legacy of having lots of fish meal, fish oil, and farmers being told that it should smell fishy, it should be oily in the hand? They were told that for so long, and now trying to make that transition to say, okay, actually we don't need that much in there. There are alternatives that we can use. Is it just a legacy to some extent?
And to some extent, but again, what do they have to go for, right? What can they look at? And we'll talk about China later with Ludan, who will promote that. In China, starter feed should be red, because red is krill. That's not always the case. Santong and others are making other starter feeds. Yubao Haishikine are making starter feeds that are not necessarily red, but are brown. But just think about it. In China, I'm meeting customers who say, why is your feed a different color from yesterday? It might be that I chose a different kind of fish meal from a different source. I guarantee it's the same grade, but the color can change. If the starter feed isn't reddish in color, they think I've been skimping on the krill meal.
Okay.
And you know, I'm not saying that they are, I mean, wrong to distrust the feed companies. I'm just saying that that's the kind of hurdle we need to get over. And that is legacy-based, yes, for sure. Because they've been used to really high-quality Japanese starter feeds in China for marine. I'm especially, of course, thinking about marine species. And that is typically high on krill. So, you know, we all know about culture change, how difficult that is. Just remember doing that. We do it in 78 countries. It seems like I'm whining a bit, but I'm just trying to explain how it takes so long, right? Sorry about that.
Yeah. And so if we do look at some of these larval feeds, as was mentioned in the last session, it seems like this is a good entree for some of these other ingredients that may come in, especially for the formulator who's looking to have a wider palette with which to work. Do you see that in Japan as well?
I hope so, yeah. I mean, we'd like to test new ingredients and whatnot, of course. So,
because again, Japan has had this reputation, especially for larval feeds, for a long time. Not that there's not good competition out there, but you know, it's one of the places that I think we can see some innovation because everybody's looking at new things.
Definitely. But I was talking to Stephanie yesterday regarding their Artemia project. And like I was saying to her, if I could write Artemia on my label, it will have the same effect, right? Because they know inherently, Artemia, that's good, that's expensive, right? So that's why inherently I understand why that project could make a lot of sense. We want to get to a point where we can showcase and really, you know, open up the basket, because there are a lot of alternatives and we don't need to use that much fish meal in these diets. It's not necessary. But you know, I don't know how it's different for country by country, but in EU, the biggest raw material is the first one on the label. And if fish meal isn't the first one on the label for the starter feeds, the farmers will notice. Okay. We'll get there, but it takes time. You're doing a lot of work in larval feeds also right now, and there is really a lot of potential there. But it's a conversion of a farmer that yeah. And again, going back to my earlier point, doesn't trust us.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's a culture change that needs to happen, and this industry. It's still relatively young, but it's still also very conservative in many areas. Also within larva, it's smaller. You should expect that here's easier to do something, but it's always been done this way. It's quality. Why change it? Yeah. So it's been discussed here about education. It's not just about consumer education, but it's also educating within the value chain. And this is happening. And I also think that more openness, transparency through the value chain is necessary and will just help. And there is a change coming, so it is improving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and education-wise, if we look at problems with the anchovy last year, herring in the North Sea, I mean, I know it's asking, how do you know the unknown, but what's going to be the next crisis with fish meal that we're going to hit here?
Yeah. Well, I think this whole thing pretty much started with this big El Nino in 97, 98. Right. Then we started, before that, all the oil in salmon feeds were fish oil. And we needed to look into alternatives. And since then, if you saw my graph yesterday, you see it's gone down. Industry has grown. There's less available. We just need to optimize more. But there's a limit to everything. And again, we saw it clearly now with the Peruvian fishery, where no more oil were available. Couldn't get enough of alternative oils. Mm-hmm. So, and this will happen again. We know that. We don't know when, but it will happen again. And that is why we cannot be dependent on these kind of raw materials. And I think we are soon now to see that marine ingredients will become the supplements of the diets rather than the base ingredients. And that will happen very soon.
Well, and from the education side, the final consumers, the general public eating seafood, do we need to educate them more to understand we've got to get with these alternative ingredients?
Yes.
And not so much fish meal.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you really need to have retailers here to sort of be involved in this conversation so they can go out and, I mean, just like today with breakfast, they had free range egg whites. I mean,
Yeah, right.
I mean, you need to have the retailers here so they can go out and they can educate the public and sort of say why we're using these ingredients and the benefits of it. So,
So I partially agree. I definitely think there's some general understanding, but I think we have to remember that what consumers are facing today is already a sort of a surplus of information. There's a real information overload, and I think consumers everywhere, I experienced it a lot in China, are really worried about what they eat.
Right.
And they really want to make sure that what they eat is safe for them and their children and their families. But, you know, putting another sticker on it is not going to cut it, I think. So there's some educational elements to it that's necessary to understand some part, but I think they want to eat safe food. Then the question is, do they want to eat sustainable food? The answer is clearly no. Sorry. They don't want to pay for it, right? We know that. There are some. There's a few. But there's not a lot who wants to pay for it. It's not going to make this room full again. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, there needs to be a decision and there needs to be cooperation, especially with the NGOs and with the government organizations, as to what are actually our criteria for a proper seafood. How do we take care of the food that we serve to our populations and to societies? And I think the requirements from the NGOs are actually more important than they are from the consumers, because if the NGOs can help us foster that, what are the products that are actually acceptable and could be put on the shelves. Monterey Bay Aquarium have an important role there to play with their seafood list, right? For the US market at least. The problem there becomes that it's who has the sustainable stamp, right? Mm-hmm. Is it Corp B? Is it Seafood Watch? Is it who's the one who says this is the right way to do it? Right. Because if you could use that and together with retailers, you'd get a long way. But at the end of the day, the big change and the big difference that we're making is the small steps that we do every day that you showed. I think the slide Vidar showed yesterday, I've always admired that slide with the usage of raw materials. I think it showcases really what's going on. If you remember his slide, it's from 1990. That's not a long time. That's a very short time. Compared to the other animal husbandry industries, I mean, they didn't do any kind of change like that. Sorry, but they didn't. We did. And it's the incremental change, is the little bit, 3 percentage points more FCR in Indonesia. That matters. That's huge, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a little bit, the incremental changes, but that's not going to sell any magazines. No newspapers will report on that. So that's where we can sort of do things. So we need to have a direction, and we need to remember that the farmers will make the fish or the shrimp that we want them to make. But either we need to do it more cost efficient, mm-hmm. and that's, I think, the main thing, that's the incremental change, or somebody has to pay. Yeah. And that could be the NGOs that say, okay, the main retailers in the US are only serving free-range eggs, or whatever it might be. Yeah. I am not a pessimist, I'm optimist. I believe that we are moving in the right direction. I really think that we are doing a lot of change. But I really think that it needs to be stated clearly, they are not going to pay for it. That's not my experience, and we come from countries that are generally seen as those that are willing to pay for this kind of stuff, mm-hmm. and retail surveys show that they are not. I'm maybe exaggerating a bit, but it's not way off.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I do think that there are some willingness to pay a little bit, but there is, and you're completely right. We cannot go from here to there right away. It's a journey. We recognize that at BioMar, and that is why you saw those gauges that I put up that I call the biosystem impact parameters. That, okay, we created those to help you on your blue journey, as we call it. Yeah. So the farmers can improve over time, and then you reach hopefully your goal in the end. And that they can then use that information to put on their products. How they do it, I don't know, but that can be problematic, or we need to find the best way to kind of get this information across to the consumers, and then we need to work together to do that, because or else it will be chaotic. It is information overload. So how do we do that? How do we find that information that we can portion out? Because we, as a consumer, we can only cope with 3 things. If you put like 10 things, then they will actually stop trust in that product. But also just to help open, we are trying something with Aqua and Whole Foods with what we call the Discover, where you can scan a QR code, so you open and you see the journey of the product, where it started, the raw materials, and just help that. Okay, this can add trust through transparency and traceability, and that hopefully can help a little bit. But we need to work together in again, the value chain to make this happen.
Yeah. Well, I remember a few years ago, every menu was going to have a QR code on it, and you'd be able to trace your fish on your plate back through to the farm it came from in Indonesia or Thailand or Vietnam or wherever, with a picture of the farmer on it. That was all promised 5 or 6 years ago, and I thought, oh, this is great. This is what we're all going to be doing. I haven't seen it yet, and yeah.
If I can add to that, we saw that too. We thought it would take off, but also what we saw it was used the most by people in the store. They read up on this, and the trick is have as little information as possible, because we only have the attention of the consumer just a few seconds. So if you put all the information you want to put in there, and then no, they don't read it. But then people in the stores, they read it, and they explained to the consumers, for those who were willing to listen.
So in Japan, do you see some of these same situations coming along as far as NGOs and certifications and the information? I mean, Japan's got the reputation of...
we were one of the first companies to do certify with ASC for red sea brim. Unfortunately, that really hasn't helped. And also Japan's sort of ASC was a little bit too strict for most of the Japanese farms, and so they developed something called MEL, which is a softer, toned down version of that, and we have that sort of domestic certification for both red sea brim and yellowtail. But unfortunately, the consumer really doesn't want it. I mean, what pushed us that way was the SDGs from the UN, and then the Olympics being held in Tokyo. So that sort of was the push to move that way. But then the pandemic hit, and it really hasn't taken off. And in Japan, there's this saying: the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And so they want to be like the swarm of krill, and all swim together. And then so once you find everyone, signing on, then everyone's gonna jump on. So it might take some more time, but that's sort of where we are there.
Yeah.
Can I just comment? I think Japan and Korea are rather conservative on these things, but I think that's also why it's interesting what's happening in China, because the Chinese government actually is trying to do something about these things, and do recognize that they have a limited water resource, and maybe that'll be part of the topic later. So are trying to push the industry further, and I think that's there you can that'll move things, right? If China moves, the rest of the world moves. That's how it works in aquaculture. I think that look in Myanmar, right? A farmer in Myanmar, what do he or she care about? A feed with less fish meal. That's not the most important point. But if you could make the pond quality better, pond water quality, by less effluence from the feces, if you can, because you have a diet that is tailored to what it needs, not more, not less, but what it needs. If you can improve the feeding, sort of the knowledge transfer in how to use this, you can move mountains like that. That, of course, as you know, Kevin, requires a hell of a lot more work than nice meetings in San Francisco. But that's how a lot of things can change, and you will see, and I think we will see the same also in Japan, because there are benefits to this that has that. It's not about getting the certification, but it's about getting the better quality, better results, and you can do that. That's not impossible, and especially introducing new raw materials. I mean, expanding the plate of the basket of raw materials that we have available really do impact also what we can deliver to the farmers in results. So there are many ways to roam, and I think we need to think of that as not just because I think on a macro level, everybody understands the challenges in this room. Everybody understands the challenges. That's just not the reality that many farmers are facing. They face a different reality, and yeah. So we need to think creatively of how we can move them along as well.
I think it's not easy to come up with new novel alternative ingredients today, because you need to. There are many boxes that you need to tick off. One of them is they need to perform well on on sustainability these days, and it's not like we won't use if your carbon footprint is too high, then we won't use it. But you need to have a plan on how to reduce it at least and present that to us. And then we can work together. And of course, those who can tick off already, they have a shorter road into the feed plant. But it ain't easy, but it is necessary.
And so do you see some evolution of some of these alternatives coming in first as functional feeds or functional ingredients, additives that then become more and more mainstream, especially if they can bring their cost of production down?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're very happy with using insect meal in Europe. It's a common part of our raw material basket today. We use Alan's products in China from Chongqing, the Calista products. We try and we develop with all these. We work a lot on grass protein as well. So these will come step by step, but it will be also a little bit local. Look, I mean, we work in Africa quite a bit. In Africa, there's a shortage of high proteins. You don't get a lot of byproducts. So insect meal, from my point of view, has a much better case in Africa than it does actually sometimes in Europe with the regulation as it is. And so it is a little bit market specific. How does it fit? Does it plug a gap in the market that you're in? China imports a lot of raw materials to be able to produce high quality, high grade gas protein is valuable in China because there's a gap in proteins. Mm-hmm. So I think you need to think of it as a toolbox instead. And as we learn to use it, we will use it. And then there's the functional element. And for sure, that's something, and I was talking to Heikki earlier, but for us, functional feeds, and we do that a lot, and you do that a lot. I don't know Dainichi so well, but functional feeds has a lot of implications, and that could be really a big thing. And it is a big thing. But when you do a functional feed to strengthen the immune system of the fish, it has a shelf life. It's not something we talk about a lot, but the natural environment will adapt. So if you strengthen the immune system in one way, eventually the biological pressure on the fish will find another way around it. So that's not a one-off you can do, right? So functional ingredients and functional elements is basically something that you need to refresh continuously. So you can't make a one-off product and then say for the next 15 years this is our functional product. That's not how it flies.
And that's not where the volume lies either. And what you need to deliver on is the nutritional value, the core nutritional value. But I have high hopes for these alternative ingredients. And today, with today's technology, you can also design it in the way that you couldn't before. When we saw that 80% of the diet was like vegetable or salmon diet, what no one really saw, that you also needed about 5% of other inputs like synthetic amino acids and all of those. If we can create those new raw materials right, we can lower that amount of synthetic ingredients that need to be used because they didn't have all the things that fishermen had.
Boy, any final comments?
I'm
Okay. Good. Well, I thought that was a great wrap up there of where we're going. So I know we're a little over time, but I really appreciate all the great comments and insights that you had to offer from a really nice global perspective with big companies that are selling all over the place. So good. Thank you very much. All right.